Before I tell you what's in this video, I want you to do something for me. Think about the last time you drove past an old building. Maybe it was on the edge of your town. Maybe it was somewhere you pass every single day without really looking at it. Broken windows, overgrown weeds pushing through cracked concrete, a chain on the front door that nobody has touched in years. Now imagine that building was a hospital. And imagine that for decades, maybe 30 years, maybe 50, nobody has asked what happened to the people inside it. Not the doctors, not the nurses, the patients. The ones who were admitted through those front doors and never walked back out. Because here is the dark truth that nobody wants to talk about. America has over 3,000 abandoned hospitals rotting across this country right now. And what happened inside them, what was done to the people trapped inside them, and what some of those buildings seem to hold on to, even decades after they were shut down, is one of the most disturbing things I have ever researched. Stay with me. Every single thing I'm about to tell you is real. Right now, at this exact moment, there are thousands of abandoned hospitals scattered across the United States. Some closed last decade. Some have been sitting empty since the 1970s. A few have been rotting since before your parents were born. They sit in forgotten corners of rural Ohio, in the outskirts of Detroit, deep in the hollows of West Virginia, on the edge of small California towns where the population dried up and left decades ago. And many of them still have things inside. X-rays still hanging on light boxes, patient files still sitting in unlocked cabinets, the names on them belonging to people whose families never knew what became of them. Gurneys parked in the middle of hallways exactly where they were left on the last day anyone worked there. But here's what most people don't realize about these buildings. They weren't just regular hospitals. The majority of America's abandoned medical institutions were psychiatric facilities, state-run asylums, mental hospitals, sanitariums. And the history of what happened inside them, the documented, verified, historical record of what American medicine did to the most vulnerable people in this country, is more disturbing than any ghost story I could ever tell you. Because the ghosts, if you believe in them, are just a symptom. The real horror is what created them. And to understand that, you have to go back to the beginning. In the 1950s, the United States had over 550,000 patients living full-time inside state psychiatric institutions. Read that number again. 500,000 people. These were massive complexes, some of them small cities unto themselves. Pilgrim State Hospital in New York held over 14,000 patients at its peak. Central State Hospital in Georgia held thousands more. Across the country, these institutions weren't just buildings. They were ecosystems. They had their own farms, their own power plants, their own railroad tracks, their own cemeteries. That's the part I want you to sit with for a moment. Their own cemeteries. Because patients who died inside these facilities were often buried right there on the hospital grounds. Not in public cemeteries, not with their families. In small, institutional burial plots, sometimes with no headstone at all. Just a number pressed into a concrete marker. Not a name, a number. Because even in death, the system that held these people refused to see them as individuals. Now, why were so many people institutionalized? This is where the history gets deeply uncomfortable. In the early to mid-20th century, the reasons someone could be committed to a psychiatric institution were broad. Dangerously broad. Epilepsy, alcoholism, severe poverty, being gay. Homosexuality was classified as a mental disorder until 1973. Women were institutionalized for hysteria, a diagnosis so vague it was applied to everything from depression to simply disagreeing with your husband. Immigrants were committed at higher rates than native-born citizens, sometimes because their inability to speak English was interpreted as evidence of mental deficiency. And once you were inside, getting out was extraordinarily difficult. Your word meant nothing. Your family's word often meant nothing. The institution was self-sustaining. More patients meant more government funding. There was no incentive to discharge people, so they stayed. For years, for decades, sometimes forever. And inside these buildings, inside the wards and the operating theaters and the basement treatment rooms, things were done to these people that were considered standard medical practice at the time. Insulin shock therapy, where patients were injected with massive doses of insulin to induce coma, sometimes for weeks at a time, because doctors believed it reset the brain. Hydrotherapy, patients submerged in freezing cold water or scalding hot water for hours, sometimes strapped into tubs so they couldn't escape. And the lobotomy. The transorbital lobotomy involved sliding a medical instrument through the eye socket and into the frontal lobe of the brain, then moving it back and forth to sever connections. It was performed on patients who had not consented, on children, on people who, by any modern standard, did not need brain surgery at all. It was called a success if patients became calm and manageable. Most of those patients lost fundamental parts of who they were. Some died. Some spent the rest of their lives in a state of quiet blankness. This is the history living in the walls of every abandoned American hospital. And then, starting in the 1960s, everything changed. The deinstitutionalization movement swept through American healthcare policy. Advances in psychiatric medication, legal reforms, budget cuts. Patients who had spent decades inside were suddenly released into a world they no longer understood. And the buildings they left behind were locked, chained, forgotten. Until people started going back in. Louisville, Kentucky, 1910. The city is in crisis. Tuberculosis is spreading fast. It fills the lungs. It kills slowly. The solution is to build a hospital far from the city. Waverly Hills Sanatorium. By the 1920s, it becomes one of the most advanced treatment centers in the country. Some patients recover. Many don't. Thousands die there. To hide death from the living, a decision is made. They build a tunnel. A 500-foot underground tunnel from the hospital to the railroad tracks. Bodies are taken through it, silently, hidden from everyone still alive. For decades, this tunnel becomes the last path for thousands of people. When the hospital closes, the tunnel is left behind. Empty, but not silent. Investigators who enter it report the same thing. A presence, a weight, the feeling of something in the darkness, something that isn't in a hurry. And inside the building, room 502. 2 nurses die there, both ruled suicides, both connected to something they could not explain, something they said they saw. Years apart, same room, same unanswered questions. Today, people still report voices, footsteps, shadows moving where nothing stands. And in the tunnel, always the tunnel, something moving in the dark.